Hey YouTube, Matty Daddy 12, Team JMT, coming to you guys with the latest of the Understanding Stuns. This one I'm going to talk about TGs and the deck that topped the North American World Qualifying Championship. So there's no other way to really talk about TGs other than to just get straight into the monster lineup. And that's what I'm going to do. They run very limited monsters because all of the monsters they run replace themselves. Now, Reborn Tengu, we all know what that does. Anytime it leaves the field, it of course replaces itself with another copy of it. 1700 attack. A Beast Warrior, and that comes into play later. Next, we're going to talk about... I want to talk about Striker and War Werewolf together. These are the three TG monsters that the deck played. It played 3 copies of War Werewolf, 3 copies of Rush Rhino, and 2 copies of Striker. Striker is a 2-star tuner with a Cyber Dragon effect. If your opponent controls a monster and you don't, you can special summon him from your hand. And then War Werewolf, anytime that a level 4 or lower monster is special summoned, you can special summon him from your hand. So that's an instant level 5 without even having to use your normal summon. So you can go 2, 3, special summon him into 5, and make Wonder Magician, make TG Gladiator, make Catastor, Librarian, whatever you wanted to make at 5 stars, or you can 2, 5, 9, and go first turn Trishula and replace the Tengu, which is a great synchro play. And which is something that most stun decks can't do. Next is Rush Rhino, and it is a 1600 attack monster that goes up to 2000 attack whenever it declares the attack. So a 2000 beater is great. And something else to remember is that Warwolf and Rush Rhino are both Beast Warriors, which again comes into play later. Next, the thing I want to talk about with the TG monsters themselves is they all have Dark Soul effect. So whenever they are destroyed and sent to the graveyard, they replace themselves to the hand, but not till the end phase. So what this gives you the option of doing is now you don't have to be worried about playing one monster at a time. You can play multiple monsters at a time because if they do get destroyed, they're just going to replace themselves. So that's something that the TG stun deck gives you, is the liberty to play more than one monster at a time. And that's what I really like about the monster lineup that the TG deck gives you. Next, I want to talk about the spells and traps that the deck is focused around. One is Dark Bribe. I feel like you're able to keep advantage enough with your Tengus and your TGs replacing themselves that you don't have to worry about advantage near as much because you keep it throughout the duel. So you can afford to give your opponent a card or two to negate their big push. And negate their one-ofs, their Dark Holes, or their Torrentials if you want to keep control of the field. So Dark Hole is something that was getting a lot of play, and it's something that I still feel like you should be playing in this deck. I don't like this card a lot because your opponent draws the card, but because you usually give up advantage whenever you do that. And like I've said before in many of these videos, these Understanding Stuns, is once you give up advantage with a stun deck, you usually lose the game. So, but I feel like with this, you can keep your advantage because you keep your advantage through your monsters and still give them the card. Next is Skill Drain, and this is an amazing card against the meta. This negates so much stuff. It's so hard to explain how much stuff Skill Drain actually hurts. It's just something that you have to play and see how bad it hurts your opponent. And it can play this at will because all of this stuff can still get its effect with Skill Drain on the field because all of this stuff activates off the field. Next, this is a card that they're only normally running one of. I really like it. I mean, it's a creature swap for your TG monsters, and then of course your TG monsters are going to replace themselves. It's kind of like creature swapping a Sangan, just with one of your TGs instead. So that's a really good card, and something that I think you should consider playing. Next, I want to talk about Dark Hole, but not necessarily just Dark Hole. I want to talk about just the mass removal cards in Dark Hole and Mirror Force and Torrential Tribute and those type of cards. You don't have to fear these cards when playing this deck, because all of these monsters will replace themselves. Outside of the Thunder King that they normally main deck 2 of, this deck will replace any monster that's destroyed. So you don't have to fear Dark Hole. You don't have to fear Torrential Tribute. You can be a lot more free about what you're summoning and what you're attacking with, because you don't have to fear losing 2 monsters or 3 monsters, which a lot of stun decks will be crippled by if you lost 2 monsters at a time. This deck can afford to lose 2 monsters at a time because those 2 monsters are going to replace themselves. Last but not least, Horn of the Phantom Beast is quite possibly broken in this deck because there is so many beast and beast warriors that you can play in this deck. Tengu, Rush Rhino, Warwolf are all 3 cards that you play 3 of. So there's 9 targets that you have for this card, not including whatever other tech cards that you may use in this deck. And the equipped monster gains 800 attack, which makes Tengu 25, I believe, and Rush Rhino 24, and makes TG Warwolf 2 grand, which are all really good stats by any standards. And of course, when you've got a Reborn Tengu at 25 that can replace itself, that is just amazing. Not on top of that, if the monster equipped with this card destroys a monster and sends it to the graveyard, you get to draw 1 card. Again, another chance that you have to gain advantage on your opponent. Again, another reason why I feel that it's okay for you to run Dark Bribes in this deck, because you're able to keep advantage, and it doesn't matter that you've given your opponent a card, because you're able to gain those cards back here. Next, I want to talk about some tech cards that you could see or that you may want to try out in this deck. First is King Tiger Wangu. You may remember me talking about him whenever I talked about anti-meta and how I really, really liked him because he hurt a lot of the meta, but that I also kind of disliked him because he's only 1700 attack and gets ran over quite a bit. Well, you know what? Now he's 25. That immediately destroys anything 1400 or less that's normal summoned or special summoned. Makes him a devastating card. He does conflict with Skill Drain, so you have to be smart when playing him and Skill Drain in the same deck, but this guy is just too good not to try out. And then something that doesn't conflict with Skill Drain, Beast King Barbaros. You're probably going to main deck 2 Skill Drain. So you can afford to main deck 2 Beast King Barbaros, and he can come out as a 1900, and then if need be, you can Horn of the Phantom Beast on him, and now he's a 2700 normal summon. Or if you're able to have Skill Drain on the field, you can normal summon him at 3 grand, which is just devastating to your opponent. Really hard to get around a 3 grand monster. Not always able to deal with those guys, especially when you can make that 3 grand monster a 3800 monster who gets to draw a card when you destroy something. So, like I've said, guys, this is something that you need to be aware of when playing in the locals, because this is a fairly cheap deck to build outside of the Tengus, and then of course it plays 3 Pot of Duality that are getting reprinted soon, so those will be pretty cheap. So other than the Tengus, this is a fairly cheap deck to build, and you will see a lot of in your local meta, especially since it has won Nationals. So keep an eye out for this. I hope you guys all try this deck, because this is an actual amazing stun deck. It's one of the few stun decks that you can afford to run only 13 to 15 monsters and be extremely successful. So I appreciate it, guys. I hope you guys have learned something from this segment. Subscribe. Comment down below. Show us how much you love us.